If this was 2,000 years ago, lifting something like this would not at all be uncommon. In fact, this was one of the best ways to improve your strength in the ancient times. So when we think of training, we think of something really complex, something where you need the best program, you need to track every calorie. However, do you find it really interesting that when you look at the statues from ancient Greece and Rome, they were really jacked and really well developed? I mean, of course, artistic exaggeration, but they were based on real people that had the most basic possible understanding of training, just riddled with bro science. So let's take a look at how strength training worked in the ancient times, from stone lifting to improvised weights to various forms of weights, from ancient Rome to ancient Greece to medieval times. So what was training like in ancient history? Strength training today compared to the past was just so much different. In fact, so many people were spending time doing physical things, physical labor. If they were not working the fields, they were fighting. So you kind of proposing to them that they should start going to the gym and just doing even more physical labor after all this time would really make you seem like a joke. However, despite this fact, a lot of ancient cultures really valued strength and athleticism to a significant extent. And as you would imagine by this fact, this significantly impacted their cultures and values that they held. We're not really gonna talk about every physical activity people did in the past, because they did about as many as we do right now. Everything from jumping to running to ball games to swimming. I mean, originally the Olympic Games started in ancient Greece, but today I want to specifically focus on strength training and combat training as well. Most important thing to consider is the historical context, because at the time most of the combat was hand to hand. So you being stronger or more athletic would be a significant advantage, and it could literally save your life. So you would imagine a lot of these ancient cultures really valued strength and athleticism, and we can even see this up to this day because we still value those things, which is obviously impacted by this history. Training for vanity itself, as is quite popular today, is not really unheard of. We actually have writings of people complaining, like in ancient Rome, how people were building muscle with no function, but overall it was quite rare. Most of the focus was on actual strength and performance, so how big of a rock you can lift, how far you can jump, how fast you can run. All these things were very, very important. Now, modern culture and movies have definitely twisted the way we see things. I mean, you would imagine a lot of these Spartans, Vikings, and these ancient gladiators were like these giant bodybuilders. It was definitely far from that, especially with the nutrition at the time and what was really going on. But they were definitely strong for their size. There is no doubt about that. So talking about the actual sources, most of our sources come from ancient Greece and Rome, and not because ancient Greeks and Romans were like the athletes of the time, but because they were literate, so we have actual writings in what was going on. In fact, most of the ancient cultures of the time were warrior cultures, and as you may know, a lot of these barbarians were known to be strong, and they weren't just born this way. They obviously had things they were doing in order to get that strong, but it's not like you would find some literate historian, like ancient Greek historian, that is going to write like a thesis on some barbarians lifting rocks in the forest. So we're really focusing on what we currently know. Now, before we get into what the Romans and Greeks did, let us go back to the mountain and let us talk about stone lifting, the staple of ancient strength training. Before the invention of barbells, machines, and dumbbells, nature provided us with weights of their own of various shapes and sizes, and these were the stones. We've found records of stone lifting all over the world, from Japan to America to Europe, and there is a reason for that, because they're the best all-around training tool. You can find tiny stones, you can find giant stones, and there are various shapes, sizes, and difficulties, and they can be thrown, and they can, as you can see, be carried as well. You can squat them, you can deadlift them, you can do triple extension, get them on the shoulder, you can overhead press them, and you can throw stones in ballistic training. If you take them seriously, they train the entire body and even your grip, especially your grip. Sure, the weights may be lower than regular barbells, but you deadlifting a 200 kilogram deadlift off the ground is not the same thing as lifting a stone. In fact, a 100 kilogram stone is definitely harder. Other than just a training tool, stone lifting was used all over the world as a type of feat of strength. We actually have found so many Greek potteries of various types of stone lifts, and in fact, we have actually discovered one stone from 6th century BCE that says on it, Bibon, the son of Fola, lifted me over his head with one hand. This stone apparently weighed about 140 kilograms, a little bit more. It had a handle carved into it, so this was not really a natural stone lift, it was more of a modified stone lift, but modified stone lifts still exist up to this day all over the world. Another record from a Greek island shows that a stone half a ton was lifted off the ground. We don't really know what that meant, whether it was just pushed, whether it was only slightly lifted, but an impressive weight nonetheless. In medieval times, stones were pushed overhead, and stones were carried in order to condition the warriors and the knights for the various types of heavy armors they had to carry around, so this was also a great conditioning tool as well. Jumping later into history, we have various stone lifting cultures that exist up to this day. Scotland is one of the most popular ones, when stones were used as a training tool when weapons were banned. Iceland also has some of the most legendary stones out there. On Iceland, stones were used in order to measure the usefulness of workers, so if you lifted a heavier stone, you would be able to secure a better position and a better pay as well. So the entire practice of using stone lifting as a feat of strength has definitely passed on to strongmen today. It is still used up to this day, so realistically, stone lifting is one of the most ancient types of strength training that exists up to this day. So that is when it comes to stone lifting, but we also know ancient Greeks were quite knowledgeable about progressive overload. There is a very popular myth of a man or a boy lifting a bull, and as big as the bull gets, the man gets bigger and stronger. So obviously, through this myth, they had figured out the concept of progressive overload, even though they didn't really know the science behind it, but they definitely figured out the concept through practice. However, strength training itself was rarely isolated. They rarely did like maximal strength events. They were usually multifunctional, so it was about how big of a tree trunk you can throw, how big of a rock you can throw, how far you can jump. They were running, they were swimming, they were even jumping and running in armor. For example, heavy racking was very popular in heavy armor because they was super useful for combat at the time. Alongside strength training, we also have combat training, and most of the actual combat sports of today have their origins in ancient history. We have knowledge about ancient boxing, wrestling, and pancration. The rules were a bit different, but it was actually quite similar. I mean, pancration is essentially what MMA is today, although they were obviously, I mean, the concept was the same, but the rules were quite different. There weren't really as many rounds, the gloves were different, but overall, this is where it all started. A little bit forward into history, we have some knowledge of ancient Slavs fighting. We have some historical resources from medieval Russia, but this most likely originated with all the ancient Slavs, this ritual known as stenka na stenku, which means wall on wall. So essentially, two groups of men would gather and they would rush at each other fighting. So this was like team versus team combat sports, and I mean, obviously this would make sense because this was a really good simulation of actual like shield wall fighting and the fighting that was going on at the time as well. However, when it comes to athleticism and strength culture, ancient Greece was the place to be. I mean, Rome also had regimens of their own. We had found dumbbells, we had found various types of exercises that we didn't really find in ancient Greece, but they had essentially just evolved what the Greeks were doing. As most of Roman culture, a lot of it was actually inspired by ancient Greece, and ancient Greece was like the fitness place of the time. We had found gymnasiums that weren't really the gyms as we have them today, but they were definitely organized things. So it wasn't like a few guys just lifting stones in the forest. We had people actually, trainers, systems in place, institutions, things were going on. It was actually quite developed for their society. I mean, most of the largest cities had these types of institutions going on. We can discover archaeological excavations of very rudimentary training programs. We even found like writings of trainers criticizing other trainers and the methods they were using. Of course, quite a bit of bro science, as keep in mind, people at this time in history were very superstitious, but even if it was placebo and it worked for them, I mean, obviously they were doing something right. Additionally, you can see just how popular strength sports were just based on the statues alone that we had found all throughout ancient Greece and Rome. For example, Hercules is essentially what you would imagine a well-developed strength athlete to look like, and they knew how to make him like that because they had people that were working out and looking like this at the time. It also goes to show that despite the fact that we have all this exercise science today and all this knowledge that we have, that people weren't really that stupid at the time. It's really not that complicated as people make it out to be. I mean, of course, there were quite a lot of athletic advancements, but people with very limited knowledge at the time did have a general basic grasp of what they were doing, and they were doing some things right that are proven up to this day. So a lot of this training may be outdated. It probably isn't the best replacement for a serious workout routine, but you can still use some of these practices to enhance your regular routine and improve strength in some aspects. Thank you for watching this video. Check out my video on the cult of Mithras and ancient Roman mythology and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.